All right. Do we have Sean? What's going on? Oh, we do have him? Oh, all right. I'm sorry. Okay. Yeah. Just bring him in. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, Sean Fitzgerald is joining us. Sean, I was just telling the story of before we got into the fun half of how you were on with when Emma Vigeland went on to Tim Pool's show. You were there, I guess, as a third guest. And my understanding, after I got back from a wedding, I saw on Twitter that I was not responding to you, apparently. And I guess ultimately found out that you had challenged me to a debate on Tim's show, also asked me to go out to dinner. But
yes.
And I figured, 50... batting 500% is pretty good. Batting 500. So we do this, not so much the dinner. I asked you, I reached out to you on Twitter and I asked you what you wanted to debate me on. And you said, my main issue is that I've seen you downplay the significant increase in crime in New York City and nationwide since 2020. The excusing of crime by blaming poverty. Emma did so in person. I do not have an example of you doing this offhand, so your position can be different. And then individual cases, Daniel Penny and the Jordan Neely case, and or the Jordan Williams case. We'll have a debate about that. But let's just let you introduce yourself. You call yourself the actual justice warrior, and my understanding is you are you're a criminology expert. Have you?
No. So I don't have a degree in criminology. I have 2 degrees in criminal justice. It's a petty distinction, but I don't try to get into qualifications that much because I don't think they matter. I think if you're a learned person,
you studied it. You're an expert on crime.
I know a bit about crime. I wouldn't call myself a perfect expert or anything of the sort.
Okay. I mean, I bring that up because I don't, I have not spent, I think probably the time that you have looking at this. And I just want to give you credit for that.
Oh, thank you. And as for the people hitting you up, listen, I apologize in the DMs in advance. I did not stoke that other than issuing the challenge on Tim's show. But, it is. I was not complaining that you were not responding. I still get tagged by people saying that you didn't respond, no matter how many times I clarified. That's how the internet works. But we're here now.
No, believe me. I don't. You don't need to explain that to me. That's it happens all the time. Yes, we are here now. And actual justice warrior. How did you come up with that moniker?
So I'm a big believer that any qualifier to justice tends to invert it and make some kind of injustice. At the time that I created the channel, it was when social justice warrior was the term du jour among the right. And I made the name. I kind of regretted it immediately, but I've stuck with it for years because, you got to commit to something.
Yeah. And so economic justice, you don't like that terminology either?
No.
Okay. What's that? All right. All right. Fair enough. Okay. So make your case here about what is the issue you have in terms of me downplaying the significant increase in crime in New York City and nationwide since 2020. Give me a sense of what you characterize how you perceive how I've downplayed that and what's problematic about it.
So I've heard this point from Emma and specifically from you on your show in response to the recent uptick in crime, that crime is not as bad as the 1990s, which is true, by the way. Compared to the peak of America, we're significantly down from that mark. However, we've had a giant increase in crime since the Black Lives Matter riots. You can actually trace it in a lot of places to the month of the riots where we had certain criminal justice reforms implemented that I believe are really driving the uptick in crime. So nationwide, we had a 30% year over year increase in the homicide rate. This is the largest increase in American history. The second largest increase in American history is actually 2000 to 2001. And what's significant about that is that's only 20%. And that includes 3,000 people killed in New York City on a single day. So it's the largest year-over-year increase in American history. New York was actually ahead of that curve. They increased 47% year over year. And to get into the raw numbers for New York City, it went from about 312 homicides. We were in and around 300 murders in the city of New York per year to 489. I think that's a significant increase. I think the argument that it's not as bad as it ever has been is a terrible argument. And I've heard a lot of people repeat this in response to what is a notable increase in crime.
Okay. So I will agree that in 2020 and in 2021, we saw increases in crime, certainly year over year, without a doubt. You're neglecting to say that those numbers are now going down. I mean, because when we talk about the most recent figures, really, those numbers are going down. So we had this peak of crime that was pretty big, like you say, in 2020 and in 2021. You measured it to the Black Lives Matter protests.
Yes.
I also noticed that during 2020 and 2021, we had a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic that also created massive unemployment, that also created massive spike in pedestrian deaths, that also provided massive spike in inflation. There were all sorts of phenomena and also massive spikes in deaths around that are attributed to the pandemic. But from your perspective, the pandemic this is not a function of the pandemic. These spikes in crime were a function of the Black Lives Matter protests. Do I understand you?
It's really the after effect of the protests. But to be clear,
crime
has declined.
The after effect. We can talk about the decline.
No, but this is important because what you said is it's misleading. So crime has declined since the increase in a lot of places from 2020 to 2021, but it's declined in comparison to the increase. Well, so New York, as an example, I love this example.
No. You're misstating that. It is. I said it decreased year over year at this point.
Yeah,
year over year, because you're talking about you're discounting when the peak of crime in this country, or a decade ago, or 2 decades ago, and you're using a year over year increase, and I'm saying that we're now in 2023, and I think you wouldn't argue against this. We have experienced now a year over year decrease both in New York and nationally in 5 out of 7 measures of crime. I think in New York, the only crime that has really gone up is car theft. But homicides down.
But down compared to what?
Year over year.
Yeah, but pre-2019, we're still up if you compare it
to there's no doubt. In fact, we're also up in inflation. But inflation is going down. So I just want to make sure that people understand the dynamic.
But 2023,
and also during 2020 and 2021, we had this huge spike in deaths from COVID, and that's also going down. We still have more deaths from COVID than we had in 2019, but we're talking about a trend in terms of it's going down. And the reason why this is important is because your argument seems to be, and I want to get back to the cause of this spike, according to you. Your argument, as far as I can tell in what you just said, was because of the Black Lives Matter protests, we had police reforms. You would call them not reforms, but
no, they're reforms.
Things. Okay. Police reforms that created this spike. So to measure whether this spike was a function of police reforms, we would have to believe those reforms have been reversed this year for the crime to go down. Now, I'm going to take issue with even the fact that there were police reforms that caused this, but that's why it's important that we all understand what's going on here in terms of crime. It went up in 2020, it went up in 2021, and now it is starting to go back down. It's still not at the level it was at 2019, and I concede that. but it is clearly going back down. You will concede that, yes?
Well, yes, depending on the area, but also
well,
you would have
nationally,
you would have to use 2022 numbers because the 2023 numbers are incomplete.
Well, yes, but at this point, 6 months in, 7 months in New York, are they up or down from last year, year over year?
It could very well be true that they're down in comparison.
What do you
to
mean?
The
It could be very well true. This is a hard number. These are actual hard. Do you want?
Well,
do
the
I need
NYPD
to read them?
puts out their data at the end of the year, and we're at the summer, and that's usually when the spikes come out.
Sean, take it from June, just the 6 months. Do you really not know those numbers? You know those numbers. If I have those numbers, you have those numbers. Come on.
2023. What crime am I looking at?
Look at the top 7 crimes. I mean, I don't understand how you don't have these numbers. If I could find these numbers, this is not what I do. I don't talk about crime that often. Like you say, I downplay it, as far according to you. And the fact is that crime numbers are down. I mean, people can Google this. Look, here's a story from Patch. Nearly every major crime in New York City drops sharply. New stats show. This is from the ComStat.
Yes, there's a decrease in 2023. And homicides are down 3% from June 2023 to last year, June 2023.
Shootings in New York dropped about 25%.
If you tell me what you're looking for, I can go find it.
Okay, well, I'll read it. I have it here. New York Times. Shootings in New York City dropped. This is July 6th. So this data is 3 weeks old. Shootings in New York City dropped by 25% through the first half of this year compared with the same period last year, extending a downward trend after a spike in violent crime during the pandemic. What else do we have? Murders, rapes, burglaries decreased by about 10% each. Robberies fell nearly 5%. But car thefts increased, like I said, by almost, it's 18%, but nearly 20%. Felony assaults by 6%. I can't tell whether that's Class D or Class B. Transit crimes have fallen nearly 4% this year. I mean, you know this stuff. So I just want to be clear. We're talking about the effects.
Yes, we have a slight decrease after a dramatic increase. That is
right.
True.
Okay, exactly.
Like the overall crime index appears to be down. Total, okay. I think it says 3% but major crimes, obviously greater disparities.
Right. Okay. So now since and we should say this is a nationwide trend. It's not just New York City.
True, but the homicide spike was ahead of the nationwide curve in the city of New York. And we can talk about other cities, like Philadelphia is a good example. They're actually at their peak homicide rate all time. So there it actually is worse than the 1990s.
Okay. And but also, again, going down. But with that said, let's talk about now your theory that there were all sorts of, let's start with just there were reforms after the 2020, because your argument is it has nothing to do with the pandemic, right?
Not nothing. I'm sure it's a factor, but what level?
How big of a factor would you say? Because you clearly think that the primary factor is the George Floyd protests.
Yes,
and
the George Floyd effect
reform
would be a better phrase for it. Yes.
Okay, the George Floyd effect. How much? Just give me a sense of like how you would break it down. 50% George Floyd effect and 50% pandemic? No, right? It's more.
I would say a good portion. I don't know if it's specifically like 50% if there's a hard number, but if you want to say, I don't know, 50 to 60%, I think that's totally fine because there were some reforms that were instituted prior that combined with reforms afterwards probably made individual areas worse.
Okay. So, all right. So what reforms are you talking about?
So in New York City, we had Raise the Age, which was actually passed prior to George Floyd. And year over year, we actually saw, and Raise the Age, if you don't know, actually makes it more difficult to prosecute youthful offenders in the city of New York.
When was that instituted?
I believe it was passed in 2017. It could have been passed in 2018. I'm not exactly sure.
No, wait a second. And when was it instituted, I guess is really what I meant.
I believe it was instituted in 2018.
So, but your whole argument is, I mean, you pegged it literally to the month
For shootings, for sure. If you want to talk about what caused the increase in shootings, in my opinion, removing the
I'm just going by what you said. And when you said there was this big spike in crime in 2020, you said it was because of the George Floyd
I just
thing.
said that there were some reforms that were passed prior to and combined with new reforms, I think created additional problems.
So you think that the age thing had like a delayed effect, like a
no. So raise the age made it more difficult to prosecute youthful offenders. Now we had bail reform, which actually came into law in 2020, which made it more difficult to hold people on certain charges, including gun possession. When combined with raise the age, that led to a spike of youthful offenders carrying guns. However, this didn't really come to fruition until Bill de Blasio got rid of the anti-crime unit, which was the unit designed specifically to target illegal guns. So it's a confluence of factors that led to an increase in youth shootings and youth homicides in the city of New York.
What now? How did those? I'm just going to stipulate for just the moment that that's why we saw this spike in New York. How did those reforms in New York implicate the spikes that we saw nationwide? Because we really did see spikes nationwide, didn't we?
So there are different reforms that we can go to that are passed in different individual areas.
So every reform that was passed around, and all these reforms went when? Right at the George Floyd protests.
Well, we were talking about New York, but there are different reforms that were passed nationwide. Some areas.
You're talking about causality, and I'm asking you, we know that crime went up nationwide, and you say it was in June of 2020. That's when it went up.
Shooting spiked specifically in June, July of 2020 when they got rid of the anti-crime unit in the city of New York.
Okay, no, but at the beginning of this entire debate.
I mean, nationwide, one of the biggest factors, I think, driving crime across the nation would be the decrease in the police force. So we had a lot of officers retire early. This is something that we're seeing across the country. The NYPD is seeing it. The LAPD is seeing it. Rural departments in middle America are seeing it. And a decrease in recruitment because they're not pulling the numbers that they actually want to see. So I think nationwide, if you're talking about a blanket thing that happened that led to an increase in crime, then I think the decrease in the overall police force is definitely a factor.
Okay, so I'm trying to zero in on this because you said at the beginning of this debate that you peg the spike in crime as the George Floyd effect.
Yes.
And it was the George Floyd effect in your mind that caused the decrease in staffing, police staffing, and that's why crime went up in the nation. In New York, it was partially the staffing and then partially these other reforms that some of which were 2 years earlier and had a delayed impact.
Yes, some of these reforms, well, it's not a delayed impact combined with other reforms. It's like breaking down a house. There are certain support beams that you could take. You can knock them down and the house will still stand. The structure will still stand. But if you knock down enough of them, they'll fall. And New York specifically, I was talking about the difference that I see between the national crime increase and New York specifically. Okay. So, yes, there would be additional factors there.
So and really what we're talking about is causality here, right? Because my argument is that the pandemic led to a spike in crime. Largely, there may be other factors, but I would say the overwhelming factor in the spike that led to the spike of crime was the pandemic. You would argue it was these police reforms, particularly in terms of staffing nationwide.
Well, the staffing was just officers retiring for fear of reform.
Okay. Bloomberg, from Bloomberg, this is a report from January 31st of this year.
Okay.
Bloomberg News analysis shows that even as staffing levels dropped during the pandemic nationally, police department headcounts exceeded those of 15 years ago when crime was higher.
Okay.
Now, how can you say that the causality runs that as you drop to staffing levels, things spike, when in fact you're still at levels that are higher than they were 15 years ago? In major cities, staffing levels rose and fell over that period, with some changes corresponding to economic downturns and local crises, which you'd imagine. But between 2011 and 2019, police staffing levels in more than half of the 20 largest cities grew, according to FBI data, and across the country. So if we're to use your standard of, like, don't compare crime rates today to the way that they were when crime was really high in the country, then why are you doing that with staffing levels?
Well, you can compare it to the peak if you want, but if we're talking about a recent crime spike, I don't think that's useful. On top of that, you just read, maybe you didn't realize it, that officers went up between 2011 and 2019. This would be before the pandemic, and crime was dropping nationwide during that period of time. Then we see an officer shortfall, and to be clear, what we're experiencing now is
still
a lot of
staff. We still have more.
Sure, but,
we still have
okay,
more
not
police
all
than we
officers
did
are equal.
15
if you look
years
at
ago.
who's retiring, it's disproportionately older, seasoned investigators, and they are not so easily replaced by new recruiting classes. And I've gone over this specifically in the LAPD, exactly who they're losing, and they've lost between 6 and 8% of their police force. Now, I believe it's 6 net, 8 total, and most of those are seasoned investigators.
And so, okay, so the reason why, so that's why we're not solving crimes. Is that what you're saying? It's not preventing crime. Investigators don't prevent crime, right? They solve crimes.
I mean, they're not only investigators. A lot of times, either.
I'm sorry, I'm just going by what you said. You said investigators, and that's why the crime.
A lot of them are seasoned investigators or seasoned officers, not easily replaced.
Understand, you know this stuff better than I do. I'm just trying to understand your logic. You say seasoned investigators is why crime went up because they're better.
Example.
And I, as far as I know,
you like to harp on like an individual term and all that because you think, oh, I'm going to get them pinned. But I'm speaking very clearly. I think everybody can understand that I'm doing that, but you're just playing dumb.
No, I'm not playing dumb. You say seasoned investigators, and I say, well, wait a second. They don't prevent crime. They solve crimes. Am I wrong?
It would also be supervisor positions and all that. Yes. So it would be very like savvy, seasoned officers and investigators.
And so
if you need that specifically clarified,
what reforms were a function of the George Floyd protests that got seasoned investigators to retire?
Well, it's not a specific reform, but the effect of driving these officers into retirement is undeniable. Just look at the numbers since the George Floyd riots.
It's also COVID, right? No? A lot of people retired across. I mean, a lot of people.
They're still retiring at similar rates. You think they're all afraid of COVID?
Well, the George Floyd protests ended 2
Yeah, there's still effects of that protest, change in attitude and sentiment in the country. Yes.
Oh, I see. It's the sentiment.
Yeah, that has an impact for sure. Officer morale is very important.
And so their morale is down because of the George Floyd protests.
Yeah, because of the George Floyd protests, people are very anti-police officers. A lot of them had their funding cut, and a lot of officers left when the funding was cut, and they're not so easily replaced by a restoration in funding.
So your argument is that funding has been cut. Is that it?
Yeah, funding was cut in certain places, yes.
I've got a story here from ABC7 New York.
It says funding was restored, yes.
Despite defunding claims, police funding has increased in many cities, and this was in October of last year.
Yeah. So what do you think that increase is attributed to?
What do I think it's attributed to?
Yeah. Why do you think funding increased when they initially reduced budgets?
ABC-owned television stations examined the budgets of more than 100 cities and counties and found 83% are spending at least 2% more on police in 2022 than they did in 2019.
Yeah. So what ended up happening was post the pandemic, post the George Floyd riots, you had a defund the police movement, and cuts were made to budgets, like, for example, the LAPD. Now, their budget was cut. A bunch of officers left the force. Like I said, net 6%. Possibly 8%. Again, the numbers update monthly. And then you have officers to supplement for that working overtime. Now, you're less productive when you're working overtime. But if you look at the LAPD's budget, it says defunding, and there's stories about this, how defunding the police actually led to an increase in payout of overtime. So you still have less officers working, and now they're working more hours. So you're actually getting poor investigators. You're also getting poorer results. Well, again, it's also driving down recruitment. So yes, less officers, less overall staff at these places. So, yeah, they might have. And again, some places cut the funding. And then in 2022, notice how you skipped over 2020 and 2021.
No, I just read what it said here because we're comparing everything 2022, to
they
2019.
The funding, but that doesn't bring people down. That doesn't bring people out of retirement. No. You said this current fiscal year compared to 2019. There was a funding reduction in a lot of places in 2021.
Right.
Then the restoration of funding and an increase in funding in a response to an increase in crime. But that does not make officers materialize, Dan.
I understand. No, I understand. Your argument is, and I think there's definitely something to that staffing levels dropped, and so we made up for it on overtime. Again, I go back to that Bloomberg report that staffing levels are still significantly higher than they were 15 years ago.
Okay.
And there was even more crime at that time.
Yeah, there was.
And we have 80% of the city's largest increased their funding. And like you say, that I guess is a function of overtime. Cops still on the beat, but you say that they're not as good at solving crimes.
You cover a lot of workers' issues when you actually have mandatory overtime and people are forced to work more and more hours. It's not productive.
Well,
like you would say the same thing if we talked about it in other labor context, correct?
What are historical figures of police solving crimes?
Solving, you're going to have to define that metric.
Clearance rate.
So clearance rate, it depends on the crime. Homicide is typically higher in terms of clearance rate because it's easier to solve. Most people are murdered by somebody that they know. There's a dead body. You don't have to worry about a lot of
What are those rates?
I'm not sure nationwide. I want to say maybe it's 60 to 70% for homicide nationwide, but it varies greatly depending on the city.
And have those dropped?
Clearance rates in certain areas for sure. Nationwide, I'm not 100% sure, but I do believe that.
And what about the other violent crimes that we're talking about, ones that don't involve people that we know?
Give me an example.
Well, assaults. What's the investigation?
Assaults would be lower, for sure.
I'm just curious historically. I mean, if your argument is that the cops are less productive, I'm just curious can we see that in actual numbers?
I mean, I can look up real quick the drop in clearance rate nationwide. I know that it is significant in certain places like Baltimore, but I don't have those specific numbers on hand.
It's weird. I mean, FBI said 5% of police arrests on violent crime. That's what the FBI figures are.
So in 1980, 71% of homicides were deemed solved or cleared, and it dropped to about 50% in 2020.
In 2020. And what was it in 2019?
I'll look it up right now.
I mean, because that's the whole premise, right? And so will you work, I mean, while you're looking that up, I'll give you a moment.
Okay, so it would be down from 61%.
It's down in 2020 from
61%.
From 2019. And where are we at? Give us the range so that we can actually see the pattern that you're suggesting.
I just said that the clearance rate went down to 50% in 2020.
And where was it
from
in 2021?
61%. So that would be an 11% increase. Decrease.
2021 should continue that trend,
sure.
Right? I mean, if your theory is correct, that should continue.
I mean, there might not be updated numbers for it, but I will look for them.
All right. Well, don't worry about that.
Because we do tend to get some criminal justice related stats later.
Okay. Now.
According to NPR, which is not the same as I was using for the source, it dropped below 50%, which is considered a new historic low. And in certain major cities like Chicago, it has dropped till around 30%.
Now, why doesn't that correlate with the staffing drops that we see?
What do you mean?
Well, there's no correlation between the numbers that you're talking about. I'm just curious because you're arguing that there was something happened in June of 2020 that caused this spike in crime. And we don't see any correlation between and you're not you're suggesting the George Floyd thing caused.
How would there not be a correlation? If I say officers are retiring and early recruitment is down, and then we see a drop in clearance rate to around 50% from 2019's 61%, and now NPR is reporting that the 2021 numbers
on murders,
would
would
be
you
sub
say
50%. How would that not be a correlation?
On murders, which you say
curious.
is on murders, which you say is the easiest one, but and is it back up? I mean, we have the staffing levels are returning, correct?
No, they're not.
They're not. Is that right?
The spending is returning, but the spending does not make officers materialize. And again, there's a difference between an officer that is a veteran of the force versus a new recruit. I mean, I just read the NPR thing that said the clearance rate is at historic lows. Now, again, that's according to NPR. Initially, I was looking at the FBI stats. They could be pulling from a different number, and therefore it could be less reliable. So I will leave that out there. But, you know, you did ask me to pull it up on the fly. And
what reforms do you attribute to the George Floyd effect? I mean, you mentioned two reforms that took place prior to the George Floyd protests. What other reforms around the country do you see that took place? I mean, I know that you're saying that there was a retirement and you're blaming it on the George Floyd thing. You don't blame the mass retirements that we saw across the board on George Floyd, like in other professions, like in teaching professions, for instance. Like we're seeing a lot of retirements in teaching. You don't blame that on the George
retirements comparable to that?
Oh, in terms of the numbers? Oh, I think they're bigger.
I mean, because there's an overall increase in retirements in the country because we have a bunch of baby boomers retiring. For sure, that exists. But officers are typically younger, and there's a lot more early retirements.
Then teachers, I think you'll find that with teachers, people are retiring before they're leaving the profession. And so they're retirement may not be the right word. They're going to go on and work other places. But you don't attribute that to the George Floyd effect.
Unlikely.
Right. And the same across the board with like all of the great resignation that we heard. Do you remember that term?
Yes.
That's not a function of the George Floyd effect.
Yeah, I mean, that's typically young people not wanting to work. It was at peak when unemployment was paying.
Actually, it wasn't that they didn't want to work. It's that they were quitting jobs.
They didn't want to work their specific job.
Yeah, and they went on to different jobs. I mean, I'm just saying, like, you are zeroing in on the George Floyd protests for this decrease in staffing in police forces across the country.
Yes,
and you're completely
ignoring
a
decrease in recruiting pool,
and you're ignoring the pandemic as an effect. Although the pandemic has this effect everywhere else in society.
No, I think the pandemic plays a role, and sure, you would have had officers leaving maybe earlier in the pandemic when things were starting to lock down. Like that's definitely a possibility. But there's a continuous decrease in officers and early retirement that is coming even till today. And I don't think that they're worried about COVID in August 2023 right now. Like it's possible they could be. They could be masking up right now.
What percentage of police in New York City quit because of vaccine mandates or around the country? Was it high?
I think the number for police for vaccine mandates was extraordinarily low. I remember a lot of right-wing people saying that, all these officers were going to be gone. But when push came to shove, when the mandate was implemented, and I think you even covered this on your show, very few people actually quit the fire department and quit the NYPD. Now, if you're saying that's different, then I mean, I could.
No,
you could go rewind your coverage on that.
It's a genuine question. Okay, so and your argument is that less police causes more crime, but you're also arguing that we haven't staffed up. How is crime dropping if there is a causal effect in terms of numbers of police? Why did it go up in 2020 and go up in 2021? Go up in 2022, but now is dropping despite the fact that we haven't hired all these police back.
So in the preliminary numbers for 2023, we've seen a slight decrease. Is that what you're trying to hang your hat on right now?
Yeah. I'm saying that we know that the trend is going down, and you're making a causality.
It's still up in comparison to 2019.
I understand, but the staffing isn't back up.
Well, you're saying the trend is going down. You're looking at the least reliable numbers that you can grasp onto to say it's going down.
Let me ask you this, okay? I turn on the air conditioning in here. Let's pretend our air conditioner works. And I turn the air conditioning unit on. I turn it to 66, let's say. And the temperature starts to drop in here. And so I say, hey, that is why the temperature's dropping, because I turned the air conditioner on. And then the next day, the temperature keeps dropping because I had the air conditioning on. But the third day, the temperature starts to rise. And the air conditioner is still exactly where it was before. Does that make sense that the air conditioner is the cause of the temperature dropping?
That the air conditioner caused the temperature dropping?
Yeah, because if it goes up, if the temperature goes up on day 3 and the air conditioner is doing the exact same thing it was doing before, how is it possible that I can make a causality argument?
Temperature? Like, I don't, what's the point of this?
It could be the external temperature, and that maybe the air conditioner hasn't been working at all. And maybe those first 2 days it was actually cooler, and on the third day it was actually warmer, and that's what's going on.
So you're saying
almost as if like COVID was acting on
well,
this
again, Sam,
crime.
You keep trying to hang your hat on COVID-19. I didn't say COVID-19 played no role. I said exactly the opposite. But I think
I'm hanging my hat, as it were, on this once-in-a-lifetime pandemic that has caused all sorts of learning deficiencies in kids, that has caused increase in stress, that has caused mass resignations, mass retirements, increase in deaths, increase in pedestrian deaths, increase in inflation, increase in destruction of all sorts of sort of elements of society. And you're making a different argument that had less of an impact. And I'm asking you, if you're making a causality argument about these reforms that supposedly took place in the wake of the George Floyd protests, or the effect that it caused staffing, then how come it's reversing itself without any of those changes that first caused?
Again, it's not reversing itself. You're overplaying your hand. It's
it is reversing itself. It's going in the opposite direction.
No, it's
not. That is the very definition of reversing itself.
What we could do is actually look at the city of New Orleans, because I happen to know that New Orleans cut their police funding well before the rest of the nation. Now, this had nothing to do with the George Floyd protests or anything like that. This had to do with budget implications. And for the years, I believe, preceding 2016, they froze their budget up until around 2019, where they actually cut their budget. Now, all the experts and nerds say that the New Orleans PD needs about 1,100 officers in order to maintain order. Now, they were at around 1,200 before these budgetary maneuvers ended up going into effect. And now they're in the high 900s. And they saw a crime increase from prior to the pandemic. And they went from a city that was in the top 10 most violent cities to on pace last year for around the number 1 or number 2 slot. I have not looked into exactly where they ended up. So they had a dramatic increase in crime that preceded the pandemic, due in large part to the fact that they cut their officers, 911 response times went up, and all of these other issues associated with that. So we have a beta test that we can look at, a specific city in the United States that implemented these policies before the pandemic, if you want to go into that.
Well, let's look at a broader sample than just New Orleans. In 2016, we had a group of criminologists who did a systemic review of 62 earlier studies. You're aware of this, right?
Of this specific thing you're bringing up right now? No.
They were police force size of crime between 1971 and 2013. They concluded that 40 years of studies consistently show that, quote, the overall effect size for police force size on crime is negative, small, and not statistically significant.
Okay.
I mean, that runs contrary to your theory, right? That
it's not
police
just,
force
it's not
size.
Just the raw numbers, it's how you utilize them. For instance, New Jersey had their police, I believe it was the Trenton police, and their union had negotiated a deal that was so absurd that they could only put 12 officers out on the street and any given night. They actually had to dismantle this. This was cited by John Oliver as an example of defunding the police, reincorporate as the Trenton Metro Police Department so they could put more officers out on the street. And we've known since the Kansas City experiment, and you can look this up, that sending officers to a targeted way can disrupt, disperse, and drive down crime rates. So yeah, obviously it's how you use them. If you just have more employees, remember, a lot of these places have non-officer employees. They have administration staff and all that. That's not going to have an impact. And there are other policies that you can implement that also play a role.
Okay. I mean, you have these specific things about different cities, but you can't explain the national trends in any way.
Nationally, before you cut me off way earlier, I was going to talk about the First Step Act. Now, this set a tone in the nation. It was signed by Donald Trump, the evil orange man. It's one of his stupider policies, and it sets up incentives. And, of course, any change in culture federally tends to trickle down nationwide for people to go soft on youthful offenders, to release nonviolent offenders early, which is a term I absolutely hate because nonviolent criminals can be more devastating than any given murderer, depending on the circumstances. I always like to say Bernie Madoff never punched anybody in the face, but he ruined more lives than most serial killers in the United States of America with his financial crimes. So, yeah, I don't agree with that policy, which was a nationwide policy. And I believe the First Step Act may have been slightly before Floyd. I don't remember the exact date, but I have a feeling it was after when it was signed by Trump.
What's the George Floyd?
The First Step Act.
When did you don't know when that took?
I can look it up right quick.
But Sean, how can you posit to me that this had an impact and it all happened and you don't even know when it was implemented?
Well, I said it's in and around that time. I don't remember exactly when it was passed. It could have been in and around that time.
What do you make about?
I've already explained to you that there were certain reforms that were instituted prior that were combined with other reforms or terrible district attorneys or similar that made them go into effect. Remember the analogy about the house and the support beams?
Yeah, no, I remember that analogy. What is your answer? And I'm sure you have one. We all know that this guy, Chesa Boudin, right, in Chesa Boudin in San Francisco, was one of these reformists, right?
Yes.
What do you make about the rise in crime in San Francisco since he was replaced by the police union's choice?
The new district attorney?
Yeah.
Well, there are some state laws in California that they have to get around. Like one of the stories that I covered recently was a man that was arrested for 77 burglaries, convicted.
Are these new laws since Chesa Boudin has been ousted?
I believe that they are, yes. So
you believe that they are? What laws are they?
I forgot. I don't know the name of it, but in California, if you're a nonviolent offender, if you're categorized as a nonviolent offender, they actually don't put you in prison. You have to go to county jail, but county jails are over.
Did we see similar rises in crime in L.A. and San Diego?
Yeah, we actually saw a dramatic increase in murder in L.A. as well.
Since the time that Chesa Boudin left office.
I'm talking about since 2020. I didn't realize that's what you were specifically asking.
Well, I mean, because Chesa Boudin is an avatar, and he left a year ago. He's an avatar for the reformists. He leaves, and then crime pops up across like 4 or 5 different measures.
Which categories are you referring to?
In San Francisco? Violent crimes.
I mean, we can pull it up here in a second.
Hello?
Hello?
Yeah, can you hear us?
Vehicle theft, 10.5. Homicide, 23%. Robbery, 13%.
Yeah, there are other problems and other factors for sure. And again, when Chesa Boudin was in office, he fired, and I believe it's called the Friday Night Massacre or something like that. He fired a bunch of seasoned district attorneys or assistant district attorneys in his office. Like, that happened, right? And again, those people took other jobs. And again, they don't just materialize out of thin air when they replace the prosecutor.
Right.
So there are impacts that go beyond that. I mean, if we were talking about any piece of legislation, like, you talk often about the impact that Ronald Reagan had on this country. well, if I said, well, Bill Clinton was president in the 90s, therefore that Ronald Reagan impact doesn't exist, you would not accept that argument. But weirdly, you're trying to put that forward right now for me.
Well, I mean, for you, the impact happened in June of 2020, right around the time of the riot.
Not for me. For the statistics, that's actually when it started to spike.
Right.
So
and
by the data, that would be accurate.
And just the moment that people started protesting with George Floyd, crime goes up because of its downstream implications. Like, time flattens and expands for you in terms of the way this causality works.
If officers are afraid to do their jobs because they feel like they're going to get prosecuted unwarrantedly, and like officers that do commit crimes should be prosecuted, to make that clear, then that could have impacts. If officers are leaving the force at record numbers, if early retirements are up and you're losing your most seasoned people, investigators or not, Sam, then yes, that would cause an increase in crime.
And you're going to ignore the meta-analysis about the from Police Journal about this relationship between.
Well, you said it was a systemic review, and I'm not ignoring it. I don't think just expanding your officers or your staff in police on its own is anything. It's what you do with that. Like, one of the great innovations in New York was that they became one of the most data-driven police departments in the entire country. So, yeah, they had a lot of officers because it's New York City. It's the largest city in the union. But it wasn't until they implemented programs like CompStat that they really were able to be effective.
Well, what do you mean by effective? Like, I'm curious.
In reducing crime.
In reducing crime.
Yes.
But, I mean, have they reduced crime? Like, how do you assess that?
I would use statistics to assess that.
Right. What statistics? What would be your metrics? Because we know that, like, for instance, during before marijuana was made legal, we know that for every 4 times, there was like 4 times the amount of arrests for black people over white people when they smoked a pot. Right. I mean, and I know just from it's anecdotal, of course, but I see, some people get away with stuff because they live in a wealthy area, let's say, and there's just not as many cops around. They're still doing the exact same crime, right? Maybe it's underage drinking. Maybe it's smoking pot on the street. I mean, they're still involved in the same thing, but they're not getting arrested.
Okay, so as for the marijuana arrest, the Manhattan Institute actually released a report where they broke down the neighborhoods in New York City specifically, which, the 4 times number comes from New York City, but it is elevated in other places, which I will address later on. And what they ended up discovering was that the biggest indicator on whether or not people were going to be arrested for pot is if they smoked outside and neighbors complained. So while disproportionately a lot of Black and Hispanic neighborhoods ended up with higher rates of marijuana arrests, very notably Astoria, Queens, which is a younger population that is not typically a Black population, and was also elevated due to the fact that they had complaints. So for that specific arrest, which you're talking about arrest now, not a measure of crime, that is actually explained. And one of the ways it's also explained is by the fact that if you have areas with higher rates of violent crime, murder, assault, homicide, rape, etc., and you deploy officers to those areas, the officers have more opportunity to see and smell things like marijuana, thus would indicate an increase in arrests. So, I wasn't talking specifically about marijuana. When I talk about crime, I'll usually talk about the crimes that are measured by the Uniform Crime Report or by the National Crime Victimization Survey or homicide statistics specifically, because, I'm not somebody who's in favor of the drug war or whatever. So if you want me to say people shouldn't be arrested for pot, sure, but that represents a small portion of what the police actually do. And again, it's not what we're talking about when we're measuring major crimes.
Okay. All right. So we can move on. I mean, your argument is that it was the George Floyd effect that created the spikes in crimes, and that the drops in crimes are a function of what?
The drops, like I said, we have a slight drop after a dramatic increase. So, it's within a lot of these drops that you're talking about. The NYPD, I pulled up the data, is something like total crimes is about 3.9% as compared to last year. So that would be like a normal range that flows year over year. That's not like
so
this
you're
dramatic
suggesting
drop.
that this is that crime's not actually dropping, that it's more
No,
like
it dropped.
mirage.
It happened, and I'm glad that it happened. I'll wait for the completed data, the victimization surveys at the end of the year. But yeah, I'm glad that it's happening. Of course.
Oh no, I didn't say that you weren't glad.
But
that
again,
it was
it's
happening.
a drop
I'm
after
just
a
saying
dramatic
that,
increase.
No, I understand it's a drop after a dramatic increase, but there's been nothing. There's nothing has changed for you. If the cause in my story,
well, certain things have changed. Eric Adams was elected.
Well, but this is nationwide. My story is COVID contributed to this nationwide spike in crime. Your story is that the George Floyd protests were the primary function in the drive
because
of crime.
During the lockdowns, crime actually dropped.
Okay, and well, yes, during the lockdowns, but COVID was still around.
Yeah,
3
but
months
I'm
later.
saying before the people got out and started rioting, crime was dropping during the pandemic.
I understand, and
now,
when people
were
were
probably
out,
afraid.
Okay,
so, you know,
you're making your argument. I think it's clear, and I'm saying that the reason why crime is down nationwide, and it is down, you say it's not much, but it is trending down, is because that coincides with society returning to some measure of normalcy after COVID is not killing as many people and hospitalizing as many people and causing the same measure of stress. You say the reason why crime is dropping a little, but it's definitely statistically measurable, is because I need to wait to the end of the year to see if it's real.
No. I'd say it's dropping, but it's like within a normal range. It's like if I were on your show and I said, I don't know, in 2019, homicides in New York were 299, and then they jumped to the number 312. That's an increase, but that's not a significant increase. It's within the range. We're talking about 13 people. Now, obviously those are lives lost, and we should consider that, but we also have to take into account that New York is the largest city in the world. Now, you're pointing out a similar decrease to that increase and claiming that it's like this dramatic drop, but it's just
no.
not
I'm not
there.
claiming it's a dramatic drop.
Well,
you're
saying
that
it's dropping. Like, explain this drop. It seems like a normal range that we would see year over year. I hope it would become a trend, but 1 year is not a trend.
Yet the trend is dropping. Yet the problem that you attribute the spike to is not changed at all.
Well, in specifically in New York City, which is what I was just referring to. Hold on. Specifically in New York City, which I was just referring to, we had a situation where they elected the most tough on crime Democrat. Now, I'm not a big fan of Eric Adams, but that is how he ran. And he ran about putting more police onto the street. We also have nationwide a lot of these district attorneys like Chesa Boudin. Now, you said crime has gone up in San Francisco. I said
it is.
Yeah,
I mean,
so
it has.
But they got rid of him, so they're trying to institute some levels of reforms. But obviously, San Francisco police, they're down in terms of recruitment. Obviously, California sometimes state law has a dramatic impact on these specific things.
Even though it doesn't have it on others.
That hold up the house of the criminal justice system. So those need to be changed. But yeah, so it depends. There are some reversals. I think those reversals are good. But in places where they're doubling down, like Larry Krasner in Philadelphia, they're still at record homicides. And not record in comparison to 2019. Record all time, worse than the 1990s. The favorite talking point of the crime denialists. Yes, people who deny crime. Yes, that's who I'm talking about.
What do you mean by deny crime?
That they'll try to minimize and deny that the increase is happening. Do what you did with marijuana arrests, where you assert that it's possibly due to arresting bias, even though that's not how we measure crime. We measure crime in reports, and then we do victimization surveys, and then we have homicide statistics. We're actually really good at measuring crime. So pointing out arresting bias is a denial
Well, wait a
tactic.
second. You just said, like, we're really good at measuring crime, but
Yes.
if you see the statistics are trending down, they're really, that's not
I didn't say
relevant.
they're nothing. I said that they're there, but they're within a range that we have now gotten into a new normal. So they're good. I'm always going to root for crime to go down. But what I'm interested in is getting to that all-time low way back in time in that far-off year of 2019. And I think you have to institute the policies that existed in 2019. We haven't even talked about incarceration. You know that prison population is declining in the United States of America, and that also seems to be tied to the increase in crime.
Not in Connecticut.
Not in Connecticut in terms of population decreasing, or
no, not in Connecticut in terms of as their prison population has dropped dramatically. They have instituted all these reforms, and crime is also dropping dramatically in Connecticut. How do you explain that?
I would have to look up the crime stats for the state of for Connecticut, because you tell me that a 4% decrease after a dramatic increase is a dramatic drop, and that's just not true. But I'll look it up.
Well, let me just pull this up. I have this somewhere here. This story about Connecticut. It's pretty dramatic. People are pretty excited in Connecticut. My understanding is. Here, let me get that for you. You can look that up too. I think it's a pretty well-known story. I'm surprised that I anticipated that you would know about that one.
Yeah, I don't know every single state in the union offhand.
Okay. I mean, Connecticut's right next door to us.
Okay.
Where's my Connecticut story here? Bear with me one second. In the meantime, what's that?
Bradley's sending it.
Oh, okay. Violent crime in 2021 down 43% since 2012. Reported crime, mostly burglaries, fell by 29% during that period. But get me that. I had. Oh wait, here it is. Sorry. This is from. This is from yesterday, July 27th. In 1999, Connecticut had so many people in prison, had to send 500 of them to be incarcerated to Virginia. That's part of the story there. The state's rate of 155 people in prison per 100,000 residents is now the ninth lowest in the country, well below the national average of 350 people per 100,000. Violent crime decreased 43% from 2012 to 2021. Property crime sank 29% during the same period. The state unleashed a range of changes. This is under Governor Malloy in 2011. So, I mean, it's a long-term trend. State unleashed a range of changes, including repealing the death penalty, bumping the age at which juveniles could be charged as adults from 16 to 18 for most crimes. I think you were against that one in New York. Eliminating some sentencing guidelines that affected predominantly people of color. They have now been able to close, I think, a bunch of prisons. He said, this is Malloy, who's now, I guess, a chancellor of the University of Maine system. Not only had the state built too many prisons, but had a mix of old buildings and new prisons built for maximum punishment instead of facilities where people could be rehabilitated. In 2016, Malloy, they went to prisons in Germany, and they came back and they did this. I would imagine you would hate this. It led to the creation of a true unit at a correctional facility, truthfulness to oneself and others, respectfulness towards the community, understanding and elevating into success. It was all programs to mentor people, and they have been sending less people to prison, and they have less crime.
So why would you think I would hate a rehabilitation program?
It just seems super soft.
No, first of all, I want to do smart things on crime. I don't want to just be cruel for no reason. If you told anybody in this country that you could take a criminal and make them a productive member of society, they would sign up for that. Easy, like, obviously. But the problem is, is that rehabilitation programs have bad data around them. One of the things that I'll actually commend London Breed for over in San Francisco is in a recent emergency crime bill, she actually pushed for, studying the way that these programs work. Now, in terms of the state of Connecticut, they might have had the crime drop, according to you. I'll take your word for it. But I do want to point out that the report that you're highlighting, a big editor's note in it, is that it glosses over the fact that clearance rates have actually dropped in the state of Connecticut. It was 16.7% going into 2020, and now it's 23.4%. So it's had a dramatic increase in clearance in the unsolved crimes. Okay. So there are problems, but not like everything has a marginal utility. So just because increasing prison population to a certain point can reduce crime doesn't mean you will continually benefit in crime reductions just by arbitrarily increasing the prison population.
We by sending less people to prison and crime reducing. I don't know if there's a causality there, but it seems to be a long-term trend. You're saying that impacts the clearance rates.
No, I just said that their clearance rates are up. It's not all rosy. I'm looking at this like Lamont
report.
Well,
why would that affect their clearance rates?
Well, I didn't say maybe some of their reforms or losing officers like nationwide trends would affect their clearance rate. I didn't say decreasing the prison population did. You just cited all this positive data from the state of Connecticut. I pull up the report that you're referring to, and they're like, listen, there is a caveat. The police are actually less productive in the state of Connecticut, which could be attributed to some, not all of the reforms. I'm not saying the prison population reduction necessarily makes officer clearance rate going down. I'm just pointing out that this is happening. Like, this is also happening in the state of Connecticut.
How does reducing the number of incarcerated individuals inhibit the...
Did I not just say I'm not saying that reducing the prison
you
population...
just brought it up when I was talking about some other
We were talking about
topic,
Connecticut overall, and you were painting a very rosy picture of the state of Connecticut.
I think the crime being down 25% is pretty rosy, even if the clearance rates are not as high. Because
I'm very happy about that.
There's two reasons why you want higher clearance rates, right? One is presumably because you want to take people off the streets who have committed a crime, A, because they've committed a crime, but B, you don't want them to commit a second crime. And B, obviously, for some type of closure for the victims. But we do see significant drops in crime as we have less incarcerated people, and these reforms, which you had said you had a problem with. But I
do have a problem with it.
Let's get to the causes of crime. Let's get to the causes of crime. I think we've examined this.
Well, Sam, again, I said this a million times. Pillars in a building. You can knock down one pillar, but if Connecticut has other things institutionally that are working to reduce crime, then that might not bring down the whole building.
So in this instance,
but nice pulling out one specific state after coming down on me for doing that about cities and all that.
It was just an article I found that was in the news 2 days ago, so that's why it was there. But let's talk about the other thing that you wanted to discuss, and that was the excusing of crime by blaming poverty.
Yes.
I will admit that I did not see this exchange with you and Emma, and I did not ask her. I've never heard her say that I excuse crime because of poverty. I would suspect that she would argue, at least in part, that crime is a function of poverty, right? Not you get out of jail free if you're poor and you've committed a crime. You live in poverty, but rather that crime is a function of poverty. I would imagine that's what she was saying. And
no, specifically when I brought up that 327 people in the city of New York are arrested for a third of the shoplifting arrests in the city of New York, which represents over 6,000 arrests. She said that those people are the most desperate and they're doing it because they need to survive or to sustain their lives.
So in other words, that
effect.
poverty...
So that sounds like an excuse to me. So yes, that would be excusing crime with the poverty excuse.
To me, it sounds like an argument as to what is driving crime. But like I say, I'm not familiar with that.
I argued, and I'll argue here.
What do you think
that the fact that we're not able to hold repeat offenders is what is causing that? If you locked up those 327 people, guess what? You have a third of the retail theft arrests gone because they keep committing the crime. How
many people would you have to lock up to make sure that you got the right 327?
Well, it would be for that specific issue, it would be the 327 that are arrested a grand total of 6,000 times. So it'd be the 327.
So when would you lock them up and throw away the key to save from the shoplifting?
Well, it wouldn't be. It would be charge them seriously, hold them in waiting for their trial, and then convict them, prosecute them seriously. Yes.
But you're saying if we lock up those 327 essentially and don't let them out, we're going to have less shoplifting. That's what you're saying, right? All right. Now, you don't know.
That's what the data says.
When do you know that it's those 327? The first time they shoplift?
No, I mean, I'm talking about repeat offenders, so it would be when they have repeat.
That's what
offenses.
I'm asking. How many? So two 2 shoplifting offenses gets you locked up for as long as you want.
We should prosecute shoplifting and retail theft seriously from the jump. The idea that this is a victimless crime is nonsensical. But let's say if you're arrested for 5 times, which, by the way, again, it's 6,000 spread over 327 people, then we don't let you out without bail. Like a judge would be able to have judgment to determine that you're a repeat offender and you are held.
You're held in like where? Where would we put them in? Like a Rikers or something?
In a jail.
And there's no dollar figure, right? We just
well, aren't you against cash bail because poverty?
Yeah, I am against cash bail.
Yeah, so I would want the judges right now. They can't assess dangerousness in the state of New York. I would want them to be able to assess. Are
shoplifters dangerous? According to you?
Yeah, they're repeat offenders, and eventually a bunch of these people, when confronted, get into physical altercations, and people have been killed over that. I've covered multiple stories of Home Depot workers being killed. We find out that the person behind the theft that led to killing that worker was arrested a bunch of times for these so-called petty crimes. You could have got them off the streets, and then somebody dies over it. Some poor person who works, for whatever, $15 an hour at Home Depot gets killed by somebody who wanted a power drill. So, yeah, I want those people off the streets, for sure.
So what do you think drives crime?
What I think drives crime?
Yeah.
Well,
I think crime?
I think public policy has a big impact. There are people that are opportunistic that will commit crime if they think there are no consequences, whether they be social or whether they be through the criminal justice system. And I've broken this down. You can think of it as a pyramid with 3 layers. The lowest part of the pyramid is the criminal justice system, the actual consequences. And the reason why this is one of the lowest deterrents is and by the way, I'm not making this up. This comes from criminal justice theory. The reason why this is one of the lowest deterrents.
I was assuming I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt that you're not.
I'm just saying it's not my theory. But the deterrence doesn't really work. It's not really that effective because most people, when they commit a crime, don't think they're going to get caught. The next stage in that pyramid would be the social consequences. So if people will treat you like a pariah if you are arrested and convicted of a crime, that is a stronger deterrent against you committing crimes. And then the top of the pyramid, the number one thing is if you believe that the law is moral and or just, that is what's going to prevent you from criminality.
Okay, and so if you live in a society where everybody lives around you lives in extreme poverty, do you think that numbers? I think was it 2 and 3 on your pyramid? I mean, in other words, so what would you do if I put you in charge of social policy and you could be king for a day, or a couple of weeks or whatever it is? What would you do? What would you do to what do you think the most effective thing we could do to fight? Like you say, there's always going to be some folks who, I don't know, living on the edge and committing crimes. But broadly speaking, what would you do?
How do you mean?
Well, you just worked out a pyramid for us. And so put that into practice, if that's the pyramid that you believe in.
Again, how do you mean? I just told you what prevents people from committing crimes. How would I put that into practice? Are you talking about from a law enforcement point of view? It would depend entirely where I am because crime is different depending on the city. It's very much down to the local municipality. So if I was designing an intervention for New York City, it would be completely different than an intervention for the city of St. Louis or the city of Chicago. So again, what do you mean?
Okay. What would you do in New York City, let's say, to deal with crime? I mean, you're I guess when we're looking at the causes of crime here, and you just laid out some type of pyramid, it sounded like you discounted the punishment one, which was the widest one, right? I mean, my understanding
deterrence actually, but yes.
Yeah, but that doesn't deter. You don't think that deters because people don't think they're going to get caught.
Yeah, a lot of people don't think they're going to get caught. So that's why I'm in favor.
So it's not a function of cops you
misunderstand. Deterrence is not that effective of a strategy from a law enforcement level, but that doesn't mean incapacitation is not an effective strategy. So incapacitation
locking up more people
would be removing repeat offenders.
And so locking up more people, but how would you get there, I guess is what you're talking about.
The first thing I would do in the state of New York, because again, it is dependent on the area, is that I would get rid of bail reform law and allow judges to have judgment. I think it's ridiculous the way we operate in the city of New York. If we're concerned about people that are poor, that can't afford their bail for lower crimes, I understand that. I would reduce the bail amounts. But what I need is for the judges to be able to assess dangerousness.
Dangerousness. So you're only talking violent crimes.
Or repeat offenders, like the original bail reform, and they've amended it to remove certain things, didn't even factor in bail jumping as a crime that could get you held. So if you didn't show up for court.
But now that's changed. When did that change?
They might have changed that specific portion, but I know they used to have aggravated vehicular manslaughter as a charge that was not bail eligible, and they did change that. So, there have been some changes to it. They actually update it every year around April when the budget comes in. So I'm not exactly sure which specific crimes, but I want judges to be able to assess repeat offenders. I don't want to be in a position where they cannot hold somebody as long as they commit this crime, and then they're incentivized to recommit the same crime over and over again.
So you want, let's say, you'd be okay with judge's discretion on bail if it's someone who has been arrested for 5 times on the same crime. Is that it?
Yeah, depending on the crime, of course.
Right.
If it's jaywalking, I don't care about jaywalking.
You don't think people should be arrested for jaywalking, do you?
Okay. I mean, even ticketing. It's New York City. I mean, everybody crosses every which way, you know.
But you think that's the most important thing, bail reform?
I think bail reform is a huge deal in the state of New York, and it impacts almost every county. I believe when the governor's race was going on, we had something like 98% of counties, or 98 out of 101 counties. I don't remember exactly how many counties, so it might have been a percentage that saw an increase in crime.
So you discount the bottom part about deterrent on that pyramid. What was the
deterrence
second?
Is the lowest and one of the least effective. Yes.
I don't get why that's on the on the bottom you think is the least effective.
Yeah.
And then the middle one is what's the next one?
That would be like societal pressure. If you feel like you're going to be an outcast from your community or treated like a pariah, like the social pressure that keeps you in line.
Okay. And then social pressure, right? And how would you increase that social pressure?
Well, I think we should do more to stigmatize criminals for sure.
How would you stigmatize
Well,
criminals
I would stop treating them like they're Aladdin, like your co-host does, where they're just like thieves with a heart of gold. I would stop sympathizing with them and sympathize with the victims.
Okay. So we in the case of shoplifting, we should sympathize with Walmart or something more, and
we should sympathize with the community who has to pay for that in higher prices, or the people who lose their jobs because these stores shut down. We should sympathize with these people
that stores shut down because
that have to end up traveling further due to the fact that there's less grocery stores in their area. Yeah, we should sympathize with them rather than the opportunistic thieves.
Okay, and so you think that there's thieves out there that Emma's walking amongst, and they're all like
that Emma's walking amongst. No, I would never say that. I would never think she would actually.
You think the thieves are watching the show? You think the thieves are watching the show and they're going, "It's okay."
More cops are going to retire.
It's not just the majority report per se. But there's this general dismissive nature towards these retail thieves. Like you can see it on every reply in the videos. Now there's people that are definitely against it.
Has that changed over time?
I think yes, people have become more sympathetic to people, and possibly due to the fact that we have the pandemic. So the excuse is that these people.
Well, wait a second, dude. Why was there this huge drop in crime? Why was this huge drop in crime? Why did that take place? So in 1990, for instance, let's say, or 87, people were too sympathetic to shoplifters. And then in the 90s, later in the 90s, they were less sympathetic to shoplifters, and that's why it went down.
Well, no, there is an overall sentiment change. I mean, for you to not acknowledge this is ridiculous. Go look at Joe Biden on the floor of the Senate pushing the crime bill and listen to the way Joe Biden talks about crime now. I'm
crime was high. My point is, crime was higher.
1990s then. Joe Biden. Yeah,
1990s,
they're passing a law.
1990s Joe Biden was harsher on crime, and crime began to drop precipitously.
Yes. Crime started to drop or drop nationwide after that crime bill. Yes.
Oh, I see what you're saying. And then crime shot up. Like when did we start as a society? Just in the past 2 years? Have we gotten more sympathetic to shoplifters?
I do think people have become more sympathetic to criminals and less sympathetic to the police, 100%. I don't know about your coverage.
Is it about the police or is it about the criminals? I thought it was.
Well, we're
really
talking about
stigma.
cultural attitudes related to crime in the criminal justice system. So yeah,
Okay.
When I talk about retail thefts, there's a lot of excuse making. I'm sure you have people on your staff that have said it's no big deal, or my favorite one where it's like wage theft actually is more than the retail theft, you know, wage theft isn't spread out over the entire economy, as if that has anything to do with what we're talking about in the first place.
Wait a second. You just said the problem with shoplifting is what it does to the community. You don't think wage theft? There's something like, what are the numbers that you understand wage theft to be on an annual basis?
Well, I know that you guys like to use the 2013 chart because it has a very big disparity that comes from the Economic Policy Institute. What do you think the wage?
Well, I mean, it's not just the Economic Policy Institute, but what do you put wage theft at?
I would put it at the tens of billions. I think the number that you guys often cite is around 50 billion, even though what you're citing is the wages recovered. But
the wages recovered. Wages recovered was closer to, I think, 20 billion. But the annual, I mean, the estimates I've seen are anywhere from like $3 to $6 billion annually, because you don't always recover it. I mean, at all. But you think that loss
the recovered would be 20 billion, but the annual
20 billion over the course of 10 years.
Over the course of 10 years.
Yeah, that's the stat that the DOJ puts out. But the point is that I just want to be clear on this. Shoplifting hurts a community more than people.
I didn't say it hurts the community more. It's just a different problem. So what you're doing
is crime.
So what you guys do is I talk about a problem, or someone like me talks about a problem.
Wait, Sean, is that
and
not
then you
crime?
say, hey, look at this other problem.
Don't get meta.
Two
Just
wrongs
address.
Makes a who cares, I guess.
Don't get meta. Just address the issue. This is wage theft, right? We both agree it's a crime.
Yeah, you shouldn't do it, and I'm in favor of
them
recovering
illegal.
it and prosecuting it.
It's illegal. Okay.
I just said I'm in favor of the prosecution of it.
And in fact, we're talking about the same people too, right? Like, because when you say, well, people don't sympathize with a corporation when there is shoplifting and it's going to hurt the workers there and the community because of high prices, and presumably, high prices are going to hurt low-income people more than others.
Well, to be clear,
I just want to be clear what you're saying.
Well, we're not talking.
How is that really not hitting the exact same players?
Well, Sam, we're not talking about the same people because, again, wage theft is spread out over the entire economy. When we talk about retail theft, that typically, now I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist, involves the retail sector. So what you're actually doing is expanding the denominator. Where do you think wage theft
is highest?
I would think probably in government contracts. A lot of these have issues with the Davis-Bacon law where they're underpaying. It probably is in major corporations with unpaid overtime. I think it's in a lot of different places. But I do know that a lot of illegal immigrants in the United States of America are entitled to the wages under Davis-Bacon, and they often get cheated. And it is a great moment years later, although sometimes their lives are ruined, when investigators find out that they're backdated pay and they give them a huge check. So I would think it happens in multiple different sectors, not just retail, but yeah, and it has multiple different forms.
I mean, all right. So you're just keying in on shoplifting. That's the crime.
When we talk about retail theft, we typically talk about retail theft.
No, I understand.
You're doing a two wrongs makes a who cares.
No, I'm just saying. I just find it curious, but that's fine. You were the one who brought up wage theft. I just want to be clear.
Yeah, because it's a common retort by people who are trying to deflect.
Don't get so meta.
Issue.
Then we won't get hung up on these things.
It's also, nobody talks about stealing from your employer, which many years is actually higher than wage theft. But, there's that too.
Okay. I guess nobody talks about that.
It's not on the charts that you present from the Economic Policy Institute.
I mean, dude, you brought up wage theft.
Yeah, because it's a common retort, and I've seen it brought up on your show.
Well, yeah, wage theft is an issue.
I never said it
We've
wasn't.
also brought up, that corporations lie about how much they're getting, how much they're suffering from petty theft. I mean, Walmart, I think, executive admitted that on a call with financiers.
Walgreens.
They blow it up.
So he's talking
Walgreens?
about a Walgreens executive where he said, or she, I don't remember, I think it might have been a woman, that it was that we may have overstated this in this specific Walgreens call. But I do remember when Walgreens got into it with London Breed, who claimed that it was completely overstated, and they clarified about 4 times that they closed due to the increase in theft specifically in San Francisco. And honestly, it should be alarming that these stores are closing in left-wing cities disproportionately, considering the giant subsidy that they got from the vaccines. Remember, these corporations were essentially given welfare by being able to be the distributors of these vaccines. That draws people into the stores. And yet at the same time, there's a giant reduction in the number of storefronts in these areas. So you would think in places where
I'm sure
they actually
COVID had
higher,
nothing to do with the closure of those stores.
well, COVID actually had everything to do with the boost in business because these were the distributors of the vaccine.
No, I understand they were to distribute the vaccine, but you're also aware that, people's purchasing patterns changed dramatically during COVID. There's a lot of restaurants that closed. There's a lot
they closed restaurants,
okay.
and if you weren't able to ship to delivery, you're pretty
all
much
right.
screwed
And
over.
So, you think we need to stigmatize
Criminals for sure, 100%.
criminals more, and that will do it. And how do you think we stigmatize criminals? Like what part of society? Like we know that there's, and you don't believe, do you believe there's a correlation between poverty and extreme poverty with crime?
Yes, I know for a fact that crime drives poverty in the United States of America and the world over.
Okay.
So yes, there is a correlation.
Do you think that there is a correlation between that the poverty drives crime?
Yes. I'm sorry,
Okay.
crime drives poverty.
Yeah. Okay. I'm asking you specifically. I know that you're arguing that you think crime creates poverty, but I'm asking you now, do you think that poverty creates crime?
I think in certain circumstances, I'm sure it could happen if you go down to a certain level, for sure. But I think that
What does
in
that
order
mean
to
if you
build,
go down to a certain level? What does that mean?
if you're like, well, we have like, well, actually, even that is a bit of a dubious notion. So like American poverty, like you would acknowledge, is relative poverty compared to poverty in like the third world.
I mean,
Like you understand that somebody in the United States of America in poverty would be under $12,000, which would be different from somebody who's living on $1.50 a day. Like
well,
under
you
$12,000.
understand that poverty is really a function of purchasing power, right?
Sure, purchasing power could have an impact.
Yeah. All poverty measures are a
Yeah,
function
for
of
you
of the
can
state,
adjust
right?
it for sure.
Right. I mean, if you had no stores, there'd be no theft of stuff in there, and that's not really relevant. But okay, yes, I understand
But
that.
you
Yes,
typically need
if you are living in America and you are poor, theoretically, you have access to more stuff than, let's say, you live somewhere else. But
yes.
You do? Okay. All right. And
Yeah, so you're talking about relative poverty. So I'm saying at a certain amount, yes, when there's like genuine desperation, like I could see circumstances where that's happening. But what we typically see is that crime is driving the poverty. Like when these people steal from their areas, when they
what do you
damage
think
places.
drives crime?
What I think people, a certain percentage of the population is going to be criminal. They need to be removed from society. So I would say human nature would be a good example.
Human nature?
Yeah, it's a
Okay.
small percentage of the population that exhibits like a deviant kind of behavior.
Okay. So what do you think drives the majority of crime?
I just said that.
Oh, you think it's just people who are born criminals?
I wouldn't say born criminals, but people who, when you don't have the proper deterrence in place, will commit crimes. Yes. And those deterrents could be police deterrence, like I said earlier,
Okay,
or
wait.
social deterrence, or whatever.
Not like everybody is subject to the same deterrents, right?
Not necessarily.
Explain this.
I'll
Because
give you So I'll give you an example. So in New York City, disproportionately, the people who live in public housing happen to be Orthodox Jewish people, right? They do not commit crimes at the same rates as other demographics. They're, in fact, among the lowest. They commit crimes near around where Asians do. So they're probably better than your average middle-class white person in the city of New York. I think that they have a stronger social structure than other groups in the United States of America, even if they're equivalent in poverty levels.
So if I was to look at like the incarceration rates of black people, for instance, relative to white people, your argument would be that there's something fundamental about their social structure that is why that we see those incarceration rates higher.
Well, it would be based on their behavior for the one-to-one, but if you're asking me for like an underlying cause to the behavior, which, by the way, I don't care about because root causes are not more important than any other cause. Let's be clear about that. So this is just like another rabbit hole, pointless like argument that has nothing to do with the subject matter, in my opinion. It's not useful or productive. But yeah, I would say that there are definite cultural differences between what were the groups? You said Black Americans and white Americans?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely cultural differences between Black Americans and white Americans, and more tolerance to criminality. And by the way, there's differences between Black New Yorkers and Black people in Chicago, and that's also reflected in the rates. And I think that does lead to different outcomes in terms of criminal justice.
And you think it's unrelated to things like poverty or systemic racism or...
Well, if we're going to use poverty as the metric and we compare poor Black Americans to poor Asians or poor Hispanics, and by the way, Hispanics commit more crimes on average, but less than Black Americans, then obviously poverty is not the determining factor if the crime rates vary wildly.
Well, I have an analogy for you. When you build in a house and you have different foundations and you pull one out. So, I mean, poverty
I think
may not be the determinant, but maybe when you mix poverty with other sort of like structural factors in society, people's have less reason to feel a stigma about crime or less reason to be invested in society. You don't subscribe.
Can you give an example?
Can I give an example?
Yeah, of this other factor.
Well, I mean, I think that like if you have been stuck in extreme poverty for extended periods of time, if you live in a society where it is harder for you to find housing or loans or to get out of a specific area in which you're living, if you have been subjected to a socialization that labels you as a criminal, or that your activity just walking around is criminal, that it might create
who's being arrested for walking around?
Well, not arrested, but harassed. I mean, I think you wouldn't deny. I mean, your argument would be there's more violent crime in certain areas, and that's why there's more cops. But we also know that, I mean, if you're a black teen and you're walking the streets in some neighborhoods, you are far more likely to get stopped and harassed by the cops than if you're a white teen.
I wouldn't say harassed, but you are more likely to interact with police. Yes,
okay.
There's more police there.
I mean, I think from the perspective of that person who is interacting with the police after having done nothing, they would perceive it as harassment.
For sure. If I was a law-abiding person in a black neighborhood and I had to interact with the police due to the fact that, criminals are acting up in my neighborhood, then that would get under my skin. I mean, What if you were like pulled over in like your car? I mean, I've told this story on the show many times, but I was an actor back in the day. And you're still an actor, buddy. Just because there's a strike doesn't mean that they're not going to resolve that.
No, that's true. I do some voice work, but nevertheless, I was on a sitcom at one point, and it was a majority black cast. And one of the buddies was we went back to his place, and we pull in into the underground driveway parking lot, and a buddy of his pulls in behind us, and he's got one of those Range Rovers, and at that time that was a very popular car in L.A. with like the Hollywood set. This is back in the 90s. And he pulls in. He's like, "Thank God you're here. I just got I was getting followed again by the cops. I've been pulled over 4 times in the past 2 months. And they check to see if I own the car." And I called the police department to see if I could get a sticker or something. And he said, the sergeant literally said, "Are you black?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "There's nothing I can do." Now, if you're a law-abiding citizen and you're driving the car that you earned and you bought the car and you're getting that type of harassment, you don't think it impacts your perspective on society?
No, I think it does. And this is Los Angeles. And what time period?
It was in the 90s.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously, there.
But you just conceded to me that this happens to 17-year-old boys in.
I mean, you could
New
call
York
me
City.
crazy, but I don't think you're saying that your friend turned into a criminal because he was pulled over. He seemed like he was really annoyed.
I think if that happened to me, and I didn't have a nice car, but rather I just got stopped every time I walk out of my house, or stopped, I don't know, once a month every time I'm out of my house, which is not hard to find.
Then you start
as
committing
an experience.
rapes? Like, I don't.
No, I would start having a far less respect for society and a far less perspective on that. Yeah, I definitely think that. I
understand you don't watch my you don't watch any of my videos or anything like that. But I said repeatedly, I think the warning needs to be brought back in terms of policing. I think writing tickets for expired registration when you're in areas with elevated rates of shootings, all that does is piss people off and turn the community against you. So there's definitely better ways to implement policy to get the community on your side. Like, I've been a huge advocate for consent searches, which is and this started in St. Louis in the 90s, which is if you're afraid that your kid is involved in a gang or might have a gun or might get shot, they have a high rate of youth homicides, still high to this very day, then you can call the police, consent to a search. They'll look for contraband, but they won't arrest your kid. I think that, and they'll send your kid to a diversion program before they get into a shooting and all that. So I think that is a good policy to build community relations with the police. Like, the way that you're speaking is as if I don't believe in that, even though I think that's absolutely crucial to the police being effective.
Okay. All right. Well, I think this was productive, Sean.
All right.
And I appreciate you coming on. Are you happy?
Yeah.
Wanted
Thank
the
you.
Debate, and I think it.
Thank you for having the conversation. Listen, I know you want people that have been ducking you and all that, and this is what prompted me to just ask for the conversation. I appreciate it.
Oh yeah, no, I say yes to just about everybody. Maybe too much, but
yeah, and
you
didn't have to do it. Like, a lot of people immediately presumed because I issued the challenge and like they didn't hear a direct announcement on a billboard or something that like I was somehow entitled to it. I obviously not entitled to it. I thank you for your time. You've been quite gracious during the course of this conversation, even if there were parts where I felt like you were trying to get me on a gotcha. But thank you for your time.
Well, I mean, I was just exploring. I don't know what you mean by a gotcha. I've never seen any of the other stuff you've done, but
okay.
I appreciate that. Actually, I got a question for you if we're going to do a gotcha.
Sure.
You're into criminal justice, right?
Sure.
You don't like the criminal part, actual justice, right? You don't like the adjective beforehand. What did you think when and I will concede I did not see the whole Tim Pool interview with you guys, with you and Emma. Did you think that she was a pedophile after that conversation?
No.
So did you see that when Tim accused her of being a pedophile from what was said in that conversation?
I didn't see that specific clip, but I have heard about it. And if he said like she's a pedophile or whatever, then that's totally uncalled for and unprompted.
Yeah, that's what I thought. That sounded weird to me, but I appreciate you're saying that.
I appreciated Tim having me on, but I'm not an employee of his or anything like that, even though on the later show I said I moved into his property.
I did not see that, but have fun there. I heard he's got a great skate park.
He does. I'm not a skateboarder, but it's a skateboarder's paradise, presumably. Yeah, let's go to the YouTube studio. Yeah, it's already on Max, guys. I don't know. I could do the thing where I like say words louder. Like, I could talk like an idiot if you want. But yeah, that was fun. I enjoyed that. I was waiting for the racism trap. I thought it was coming at the end, but it did not appear to be prepared properly, which was fun. You know, I think I pointed out a bunch of things that Sam was doing when he was like changing up his argument, and that was also fun. You know, like I genuinely enjoyed that. Like, you know, but then again, I am like psychopathic and a YouTuber, so I enjoy these kind of things. But, you know, obviously you guys will be the determining factor of whether or not it went well or not. And then his audience, you know, that's how it will work. It was nice for them to not be able to deflect to Tim Pool. All right. So let me just drag this window within view. I'll move this over here so that way I can see myself. I still have a video to edit today, which is, you know, no, this is not exactly what I want to do. But, yeah, as long as it's all coming through, though, for you guys, then that's great. Okay, so I'm going to read these Super Chats. I'm going to try to power through them. If there's any questions. Jesus, I just see the second one. So Auroch, A-U-R-O-C-H, sent $2, no Super Chat. Make the transition for $5, says Anna Kasparian just announced that she's pregnant. I don't believe that's true because I'm seeing it in a Super Chat. But to be clear, her husband would be the father, okay? And I am not her husband, for all of those of you who think that we're going to start dating. 3x3 Nilo, you guys with the names, did drink every time Sam attempts to reframe AJW when AJW attempts to make a clear and direct argument or inquiry. I predict constant reframed arguments. I think you would be dead if you drank on those intervals. I think I disavow because I don't want you guys to die. I care about you guys. So, yeah. The next one is Fector Mephitis, who says, I hope we can watch it from here. I hate the thought of giving Sammy Bucks a view. Yeah, I'm glad we got it to work out. They did not provide me the link that I needed. There's an embed link with the software that they utilize, and they were not turning that over. They said it was a security issue and all that. But here's the thing. There was a way to work around it, but they decided not to. But I got permission to do the stream snipe, so that is there. I did the stream snipe, and it only took a few minutes to set up. So that worked out great. I'm glad you guys enjoyed it. It was a little delayed from Sam's thing, but you know what? The OBS software actually came through in a big way to make this happen. So for voice of the people, don't give Sam an inch. Keep him on point against the ropes. Let's enjoy watching this pathetic excuse for a human squirm. And listen, I appreciate him doing it, but I do think that when he tried to say, oh, it's just this factor, like very much try to strawman my argument, I made a point to say, no, I do say it's a confluence of factors. He wanted like a specific percentage, you know, it is a good debate tactic to say, you know, ask for specifics and all of that. But I think I avoided those traps for the most part. Julian Giangrande, you know, for somebody who's half Latino, I don't speak Latin words very well, says, Sean, what up, my man, for $5. Kumi 2 for $5 in a currency I don't understand, says nothing. Filthy Casual says your volume is low, you Muppet. Thank you for your kind words and contribution. 3x3 Nilo says Sam seems to have a history of being uninformed. Well, I knew that right away where he was talking about how, you know, he was like appealing to my credentials. It was a way to like kind of puff me up before he took me down. But I think he only got step 1 of that, not step 2. So, you know, but yeah, I was aware of that coming. Also, like, to be clear, I've never really mentioned like the degrees and the education and all that because I don't think it's that important. The only time, or the first time it came up is when Vosh was asking if I was a lawyer or something. So yeah, that's not something that I ever do. Because I don't think, you know, you could have a degree in something and be like completely worthless in communicating that information. And I feel like I learned maybe where to look, but like my curiosity is what like led me to find these sources and all that. So I don't think anybody, like, it's not beyond the grasp of anybody. For Nico Arcadia, Common Sense says low crime equals civilization. Honesty, honesty, honesty. That was for $10. Thank you. Voice of the People again for $5. The numbers are going down because Alvin Bragg is downgrading and dismissing charges. So this would be inaccurate because the reports, not the charges, determine the crimes. Now, the numbers are going down, but they're like within a, reasonable, they're within a similar range. Like I wouldn't be on this channel complaining about an increase of that range. So, and we have Big Time who says Larry Krasner doesn't charge the Cat Blacks with gun charges in Philly. Yes, I would have loved to harp on Philly versus the crime is not as bad as the 1990s. 3x3 Nilo, Sean doesn't know how to deal with interruptions. I feel like I interrupted back a couple of times. A long story short, Adams did bring back the plain clothes last year. Yes, I do think that has an impact. Spencer Harmon for $20 says Sam, but spelled S @ is garbage. Just garbage. I think he was doing an Anna Kasparian. You are garbage. Blast Radius, listen to me. Blast Radius says, trust me, Seder would not be a crime denier if this crap was in his community daily. Trust me on that. This is how leftists like him operate. Joshua 029 for $10 USD says that dude on the left is going to have back problems from carrying around this gigantic brain. Thank you. I think I was on the left. I don't know. Me Meloath for $10. Thank you. Marcos for $1. Thank you. 3x Nihilo. Every time I pronounce that name, I pronounce it wrong. For $5. Sean is coming off bad. Good luck moderating it out of the chat. Thumbing the scales of the audience perception makes you seem fragile and bad faith. I don't think I did that, but thank you for the $5 anyway. Blast Radius, how did the pandemic lead to a spike in crime when the lockdowns and curfews were happening everywhere in America, Seder? Yeah, so during the initial lockdowns, crime went down because nobody was outside. So obviously there was a change post the riots. Mike Fuss says investigators solve crimes. That actually puts criminals in prison. That prevents crimes. That was actually one of my favorite parts where I brought up that a lot of these people were seasoned investigators, and Sam was like, well, those are only investigators. It's like, no, not only investigators. I had to address that point about 4 times to not let him get away with it. Critical Wit says for $5, law, if funding was restored, then it had to have fallen in the first place. Sam is silly. I brought this up. Again, these were a lot of things that I've talked about on my channel ad nauseum. Like, there was nothing new in terms of argumentation. William Staley says, Sam, can you actually prepare to debate rather than constantly engaging in sophistry? This shows Sean is punching well below his weight skill-wise. Thank you for the kind words. I'll pass that message along to Sam. Vigatron says, well done, sir, with a heart emoji. I appreciate that. Lord Osterman says, why would crime drop if prosecutors are letting many criminals go these days? Again, it depends on where. John, for $5, says, 15 years ago, does he know this was the Great Depression? It was actually the Great Recession. Of course, the head of Clint would have been lower in 2008. Insert Soulja Boy name. Yeah, crime actually went down in the Great Recession, by the way. Blast Radius for $10 says, leftists like Seder will light a match, defund the police in America, and afterwards try to play dumb like him and his progressive buddies had nothing to do with it. Alternate Keck for $5 says, take some money for dealing with this clown. He can't stop talking about nonsense. I will say that story about the Range Rover, such a waste of time. It was. I wish we didn't end basically on that note. This happened to my friend in 1995 when he was driving like a $100,000 car. Like, okay, Sam, I'm sorry. Like, I'm sorry about your friend. I'm sorry that you feel guilty about that. Let me see if I could adjust this so I could be less orange. There we go. As pooped by Anakin Skywalker, we don't need cops. The Second Amendment for a reason. Yes, I believe in self-defense rights. Thal says for $20, AJW can't win. Sam has buckets of proof he can guzzle, proof in buckets and quotes, from buckets, just buckets and buckets. WHM_W says, that's lockdowns and vaccine mandates for you bozo. Henrik Kuto says, I hope this money helps you recover from the pure brainworms you're getting from Sam Seder. And M for $10 Canadian, no message. 3X Nilo, $2, again, donating hardcore. No message or message retracted. Dirty South FGC, ask if we had 1 day of zero crime, does crime exist? That's actually a trend. I don't know if you know that. A quick decline is a new trend. That's actually the new word for it. If you guys are unfamiliar, that is how that works. Bob the Hun, are you going? People are going to say Sam won because he dominated the conversation. Sean isn't getting to grill him on any stupid shit he said over the years. Meanwhile, Sam is nitpicking him every second. I think the nitpicking looked pretty bad. And then he sent that again for $10, and then he sent it again for $10. So thank you for the $30 in the same message. USD2, chat is censored. Why so frightened of free feedback? YouTube has its own filters, and my mods get rid of certain nonsense. I don't know what you're referring to. Gora-Sero says, I like how his critique of Sitch and Adam was they pulled a clip of him, and they had to explain the quote to him to continue the debate. And now we're pivoting on Connecticut. Yeah, I watched that stream, and good on Sitch and Adams for pulling up a quote. And what was funny about that is Sam was like, when did I say that? And it was like 6 days ago. That did make me laugh. So good on them for that one. For Calahero, 30-30 for $5. What is happening now? Sean is debating a team and still dominating, while Sam desperately nitpicks irrelevant points to try to gotcha Sean. That is true. He did harp on a lot of things that were like, very minimal. But the problem is that you can try to do that, but I'm very into the like niche numbers. I did think it was funny when he was upset that I didn't have every statistic offhand. And I'm like, no, I'll just look it up. Like, you could get frazzled in that kind of section and be embarrassed. But the idea that I would have everything offhand is ridiculous. Like, I'm working on Cleveland stuff, so I'm not thinking about the state of Connecticut. Gonzo the Good, crime is going down because it's being legalized. Chewbacca's lover, Sam knows he can't win on the facts. He's trying to control the conversation and make Sean defend every point while not having to defend his positions on crime and all the stupid stuff he says. Not here for 69.69. Thank you for that and that number. Sam's live chat is so disappointingly moronic. Sean's words are zooming over their heads. They're jumping on clarification on simple facts as some sort of victory. What the hell is wrong with them? By the way, 69 in chat, Voice of the People says, when Sam realized he was losing, this went from a debate to an interview / learning session. Well done, Sean. WHM_W says, Sean, you need a chance to interrogate / cross-examine Sam. You're doing all the answering and just asking questions. Okay. Yeah, that's fair. I could have pressed more on that. I did aggravate him with the wage theft thing, which is funny. Because he didn't bring it up, but I know people in his staff bring it up all the time when they talk about the topic. This debate needed a moderator. Sam was just steering the conversation wherever he wants to go and to talk about whatever he wants to talk about. ER for $10 says the wage theft issue is a red herring. We were talking about shoplifting. I think I pointed that out pretty clearly, that this is a common deflection / denial technique. I thought you were above Biden's stuttering compilation. Sam did stutter a lot near the end. I, who tend to stutter and tend to speak poorly on live, ended up speaking quite clearly and coherently. It was elegant, if I do say so myself, because none of you have said how elegant I was. But I did have an emergency person come in and grab me water because I was getting, a little dry in the mouth. For Thomas Paris, here lies Sam Seder, giant among grifters, master of pivots. Never has there been a more cunning wielder of a dishonest argument. Slew by Sean, warrior of actual justice. Crime is about morality, not poverty. That comes from Gonzo the Good. Lord Osserman, who I keep trying to say Awesoma, but it says Osserman. Opportunity drives crime. That's true. Not here. This is definitely Sean's most difficult debate. I don't think he's ever debated such a huge R word before. 420 in the chat, ladies. That's from Not Here. Anonymous. Sam is desperate to trap Sean in a gotcha question. Julian for $100. Jesus! I got to give the big reaction to that. Keep up the good work, Sean. $100, and he didn't even send me a long message. Very, very, very. Thank you very much. Slevin says you're doing you're doing good work is what I think he meant to say, buddy. Hold your ground. Mike, the dad Crosby. I was on a sitcom once, says the leftist with zero sense of humor. Must have been the straight man. Oh, wait. I can't say that for now, right? Not, LGBT. Listen, Sam has a wife and a child, so. And that was repeated again. I disavow any poor references to the LGBTQ XXIIP. Slevin for $5 says comparing the police institution of the 90s to the police institution of the 2020/2030, by the way. The 2020s is what he meant by that. Not Here says Sam is a personification of playing chess against a pigeon idiom. His only move is crapping. Crapping on the board when it's his move. I think you might have meant Sean, but okay. Or maybe, Sam is the pigeon in this thing. Whatever. Joe Sullivan says, am I the only one who hears the Star Spangled Banner playing in the background? Also, I see the Eagles taking flight, rockets exploding, and monster trucks. Bob the Hun says, Sam is bent out of shape over how Tim treated Emma as rich. She went for personal below-the-belt pot shots first. Sam did the same thing right there. Did the same thing here. Yeah, they did attack Tim, but I didn't watch a lot of their coverage of that because I don't care about their opinion on that conversation. But yeah, I mean, if Tim, which I gave the stipulation that it's an if, called her like a pedo, then I don't agree with that. But I don't know if that happened. I think he said like tolerates grooming or whatever verbiage he used. But if I'm wrong, then whatever. Send me the clip. It's fine. Begin of the debate was basically an interview of your views and reading articles. Second half was the debate. Next time, get a moderate W on your side. I couldn't be the moderator and the debater this time. I was in majority retorts chat, simply agreed with AJW, provided valid retorts to what they were saying, had two accounts banned. It's shameful and embarrassing on their part, yet they called AJW fans Nazis. Yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate you coming over, and I'm sorry you got banned from their chat twice for agreeing with me. Well done. You didn't have ums or uhs. You stated clearly your opinions and facts. Your voice didn't get louder and strained. You should be proud of yourself. That's from RKK, and Casey Anderson is the person who got banned. So let me refresh one more time, and then I will wrap this stream. But again, thank you guys all for watching. I saw over 5,000 people tuning in live at one point. I'll check if that's peak later on, but I really appreciate that. You know, it's nice. It's nice that you guys care about what I did. And obviously I'm not afraid of Sam Seder, especially on a topic that I clearly know more about than him. Voice of the people. You did great. I laughed when it turned into a learning session for him. If you need help with Streamlabs, I'm willing to help you. Thank you. Jerry RN, is that Sam Skeleton back behind you after you murdered him in the debate? Gerald Armstrong, the teacher example Sam said was nonsense. Tell me a teacher who fights crime. So he was referring to like the pandemic causing resignations in teachers. Again, the ages of the people retiring early or leaving the profession are higher. And I think people were leaving the teaching profession earlier than the pandemic, but I could be wrong about that. You know, of course you enjoyed that demolition of the wokest agenda. Sam didn't even try to debate. Seemed like he was interviewing and trying to get some gotchas. Most of the time, all he could do was laugh. Sean put repeat offenders in jail, Sam. Sam, put more people in jail. Sam is such a disingenuous rat. Yeah. I mean, I don't like, that's like one of the key highlights from the other one where I was like, yes, we should put the people who are repeat offending in jail. And he was like, again, it's like asking for specifics, but specifics that didn't matter. So he's like, oh, how many times should they reoffend before you put them in jail? And I'm like, he's like, should it be 3 times? I'm like, 5. It doesn't matter. Like, these people are offending 6,000 times. Like that, they're not going to jail. We have that burglar story out in Los Angeles. The guy's convicted of 77 felonies, pled guilty to 54 burglaries, and he gets time served. So yeah, we need something between infinite and 1. That's a number I want to go for, okay? Ryan Tate, Sam's team versus Sean. Great bit on retail versus Sam. By the way, I could see, I don't know if you guys could see, I could see into their studio room. So I could see the reactions of their staff. I even worked into All Criminals Are Aladdin thing, which I thought was funny. You should have pushed back about Emma and Tim. Flipped the script. She accused him of stochastic terrorism. Listen, I was there and I pushed back in the moment. Stabbing Joe Scarborough, $5. Thank you. Miss Sparkles. The blue is what... Oh, the blue is what causes the orange. Yeah, you know what? That is true. Now that the stream is almost over, if I remember correctly, the way I fixed that in the other thing was actually shifted to a lighter blue. Yeah, lighter blue. That would be the answer. Thank you for that, Miss Sparkles. Isaac Lopez Cordell laughed when you asked how shoplifters could be a threat. I work in corporate at a certain retail store, and we got the notification of people grabbing axes and threatening cashiers. Yeah, I mean, the fact that people don't understand that these people churn violent, and the more opportunities you leave them out in the street, the more likely that is to happen, is absurd. Also, I just dropped my keyboard, and I hope everything's back and connected. So for Bell, that is LOL, the reason for the early teacher retirement is because of BLM pointing out black kids get disciplined more. Yeah, it actually could have had an impact, but I don't really want to go down into that rabbit hole. Surprisingly, we talked very little about racism. Now, I knew he was going to bring up marijuana, so I actually have on my tabs a couple of articles, including that Manhattan Institute article. And when I brought up Astoria, which is a wealthy, young, like, hipster area, by the way, it was a really nice area. It's gotten worse in recent years. He didn't have a good answer for that and just wanted to move on. Just leave the room quietly. Bail Factor says, here comes some bucks for you to prepare for Biden's second term. Great job, by the way. WHM_W. I think I said I wanted to take 1990s Biden on a date, and I got no reaction from him on that. Well, to be fair, I didn't think Sam would fall so easily by your one question towards the end. And ban head for $5 Canadian. Thank you. No message. All right, I'm going to refresh one more time, guys. It's just I'm tired. I want to go to bed. I'm a baby. It's past my bedtime. So thank you, though. Seriously. Like, I mean, you know, like technically you're sending me money. So, you know. I can't believe... so this is from Xi Jinping with some Chinese lettering that I don't know. I can't believe he debated the guy from Bob's Burgers. He got thrown off when I said, Sam, you're still an actor, buddy. The strike hasn't killed you. The final answer, you won. Sam just constantly asking questions, which puts you on the defense. He never actually states his positions, and buckets is in all caps. Mr. Squiggies, who I think is going to be the last super chatter of the day, you also dropped this crown. That's a good way to end, honestly. Respect. You know, flattery will get you everywhere with me. I just want you guys to know that. Again, thank you guys so much for tuning in. I know it's 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, but relax. But yeah, thank you so much, guys, for tuning in. I really appreciate you. The super chatters, thank you so much. I have a chat from Chris Ted Tucker. I'll read it. It says, ETs are the new minority with a ridiculously low crime rate of 0 per 100,000. It's not racist to point this out. Yes, that is what we will end on. But seriously, thank you guys. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to the clips. I love all of you, except for some of you, and you know who you are. And yes, you do know who you are. But really